It's always a good sign when you need more chairs, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't. I'm over 50 people. That's amazing.
Yeah.
We get 6 or 7.
We're talking about the auction tomorrow night. We might get 3 or 4.
Right.
People don't think they'll get a job, you know.
Yeah, I understand.
And trust me, they will get a job.
Yeah, even if they're not at the meeting.
Yes, correct.
Right. Okay, good evening, everyone. For those I have sit and sit, my name is Chris Murphy. I'm president of the club, so thank you all very much for coming along. I'm going to hand around the sign-in book for our public liability compliance stuff and COVID compliance. So, if you can please print your name, put a contact phone number in case we need to ring you, that would be appreciated. We might start with you, Ian, and just work our way around the table. So we've got a full house tonight. You know we've got a full house and we're running out of raffle tickets. So, number one rule, do not run out of raffle tickets. We're running out of raffle tickets. So I'm sorry for those who don't get a ticket. You've done a wonderful job for all the tickets. So thank you very much. Congratulations. Well done. Just before we do start, just have a quick presentation from Chelsea. It's your prize for this show the other week. So congratulations, Chelsea. Okay, really appreciate that we've got 3 wonderful guests from across the border. We've got Ray, Peter and Stephen. Stephen, you must have been a hit, mate. You've been invited back again straight away, so well done.
Yeah, I'm pretty honoured, actually.
To be genuinely honest, we had lots of really positive feedback about the presentation last time, and given that you said it was your very first time on Zoom, you did really wonderfully well. So thank you, and it was much appreciated. So great to have you back.
Oh, thank you.
Peter, thank you for joining us as well. You've been a bit of a regular as well with us, so thank you very much. And Ray, on behalf of the club, mate, congratulations on the 4 winners a month or so ago. So
thank you.
And obviously you are an ex-South Australian, so we still claim you as one of ours, even though you put the wrong state's rings on the legs at the moment, but that's okay. So I'm going to hand over to Ian. So the topic tonight is 5 biggest mistakes, I think is how we phrased it. 5 biggest mistakes that we've made breeding budgies. So hopefully it's a great opportunity if we get 15 different mistakes that we can I suppose capitalise on that, incorporate that into what we do, and hopefully minimise those errors that we make. Because obviously that's the number one aim, is to get as many chicks on the food as possible and get as many chicks as we can for our best pairs. So hopefully with a bit of guidance from these 3 wise men tonight, we will, for those of us about to kick into breeding season in the next few months, we'll be able to maximise that moving forward. So Ian, I'll hand over to you if you want to just coordinate.
Sure. So what we're going to do, we'll go through the breeders individually. They'll go through their 5. Any questions you have, ask at the end of that particular session. We may find we double up on any particular mistakes, but we can always go over them again. Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Ray.
I'll let one of the other guys go first. I'll have a listen to what they've got to say.
I was going to go last too, right? So
Okay, well, I'll go first. I'm not scared.
I didn't think you would be.
No. Okay, well, my very first one is one that sits dearly in my wife's pocket of the world, and that is buying my first pair of Budgerigars. Okay, ever since then, it's just cost money, but it's been the most enjoyable money spent ever. So I would have to say, for her benefit, that was the worst mistake, because it does consume a fair bit of my time. I do get to spend a lot of time with nice people, but it is a costly exercise, particularly when I've moved house and had to build a new bird room, and the list goes on and on and on. So that's number 1. Number 2 is not understanding the importance of isolation when bringing in a bird into the bird room. About 13 years ago, I bought a bird in, and not thinking, put it in my aviary, which had my sales birds in it. A week later, I had less than 3 birds left. Fortunately, I didn't put it in my keep aviary. Otherwise, I would have had an absolute nightmare. So the importance of isolation when bringing a new bird in is really, really something you can't afford to forget. The next one, number 3, was trialing a medication on a lesser bird before I gave it to my better birds. And the reason I say this is I got a new bottle of a mite drops, ivermectin, and I had just done a cull. And this is once again about 14 years ago. I just done my cull. I put all my keepers, young keepers, in one aviary, and as I turned them loose into the fresh aviary, I put a drop on the back of their head. 3 hours later, there was nothing left. And what had actually happened is the ivermectin hadn't been diluted down from the full strength product. So now, as a matter of course, with any medication, and I don't just mean the ivermectin I was using, any medication, I always trial it on 1 or 2 of my lesser birds first. Number 4 is a breeding mistake that, through lack of experience, caused me long-term problems. And it was after we first introduced the English birds into my bird room, I concentrated on one feature. And I forgot about the fact that we're breeding a complete Budgerigar. So I concentrated on feather, okay? Forgot about the body structure of the bird. So 6 or 7 years later down the track, I had the most wonderful faces on my birds. I didn't have any body. Now, to breed that out is a long-term problem because all the birds were prepotent for the feather and the small structure. So that was number 4. And number 5 is one that I'm sure a lot of us have come across, and that is when purchasing an outcross, making the mistake of purchasing a bird that looks absolutely amazing and is 2 or 3 years old. I've done it, and I'm sure everyone else who has budgies has done it or is going to do it in the future. You know, and that's a buyer beware thing. You've got to take the risk, right? I personally won't take that risk anymore. If I'm going to buy a bird at an auction or from someone's place, I'll always buy a young bird. Maybe if I knew the person really well and they gave me their guarantee that an older bird will breed, fine. But just to be on the safe side, I always buy a young bird because unfortunately too many times I've been caught where I buy a 2 or 3 year old bird, get it home, and it doesn't do what it's meant to. So they're my 5 points. I hope that helps anyone in the future.
You say about isolating a new bird into your aviary. How long would you suggest isolating it for?
Okay. To me, one of the easiest way of isolating it is to whack it straight in a breeding cage. Okay, I do that nearly 100% of the time now. But after that experience I had, I used to put them in a separate cage and I'd give them just a broad spectrum antibiotic right from the word go for a week, right? And then leave it in the separate cage for a month before releasing it into my aviary that had the worst birds in it. I would never put them straight in with my better ones. Having said that, I've spoken to other people and they believe that what they do is isolate the bird on its own for 2 weeks. And if the bird is healthy after 2 weeks, then the chances of it having any sort of illness is almost 0. But I still go through the process of antibiotics for a week, isolate it for a month, or alternatively straight in the breeding cabinet.
No, it's an interesting one with suggesting going in the breeding cabinet.
Well, in a breeding cabinet, it can't affect anything other than the one other bird that's with it, should anything go wrong.
Yeah. The transference of illness, how do you change your seed? Do you have a pot that doesn't need changing, or?
No, I change my seed regularly, right? But in an isolated cage, it's not a problem. In a breeding cabinet, it's not a problem.
See, I've got to take my seed out of my cages and put it through a winnower, and it's all then mixed up. Does that have a possibility of transferring the illness across more birds?
Oh, look, I think if you've gone through the isolation process, you just make sure the seed that you use in the isolation cage doesn't come in contact with the rest. That small amount, you can just discard it.
Yeah, okay. Are there any other questions for Stephen? Yeah. Did you hear that, Stephen?
No, not a word. I'm sorry.
Okay. She was asking about using antibiotics on the isolated birds, but that obviously then doesn't cater for viruses. And also, what do you think about the effects of then using a probiotic to counteract the antibiotic?
Well, I use probiotics weekly, so for me, that's not an issue. A virus, well, let's all be honest, you can't do anything to prevent a virus from happening. If it's going to happen, it will. Most of the illnesses that budgies get are bacterial. So consequently, the the medication that I use, the antibiotics.
What antibiotic do you use?
I use a broad spectrum one. It's for Better Farm.
So you said triple C?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, I don't do the whole stud. It's only the new bird that comes in.
Right, yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions? Okay, so who wanted to go second?
Ray.
I think Ray's dropped off, hasn't he?
Oh, Ray has dropped off.
Oh,
So it doesn't leave a lot of options, does it?
okay.
So I just want to maybe pick up on the pardon me, on the antibiotic thing. I you know, if someone's looking, and I'm not a vet, okay, so this is not veterinary advice because I'm not a vet. But if you're looking for a broad spectrum antibiotic, Baytril's a really good one because it's effective on gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. So it's a really good go-to, and I have that in my medicine cabinet all the time. I've found it to be the best sort of go-to antibiotic for if a bird looks crook. That's kind of my first aid. And if Baytril and heat can't fix it, well, nothing will. So yeah, but it's unlike triple C, it's prescription, so you'll need to talk nicely to your vet to get some. Or if you're a dog breeder, it's often used. Baytril's often used for in dogs. But anyway, my mistakes. So I think the first one, back when the second edition of the challenge came out, so when Gerald Binks rewrote it, I thought, well, that's going to be a really good Christmas present. So I emailed Gerald and organised a copy, and then for some reason I ended up ringing him, and we had a big long chat, and he said to me, so, you know, how's your breeding season going? And I said, well, it's going really shit because I've just got dead in shell everywhere. Pardon me. And as quick as a flash, he said vitamin B12. And so I got a soluble vitamin supplement, started using it, and lo and behold, away went the problem. Now, dead in shell never goes away completely, okay? Don't think that it's, you know, whack a bit of B12 in your water and you'll never have a chick dead in shell. But I had B12 deficient birds, and I was not hardly getting a chick out of the egg. If you use B12 in the water, which I do weekly, you'll find when the chicks come out, they're almost like a bright pink color. They're almost like fluorescent pink. And B12's about giving them the energy to get out of the egg. So that was a mistake I made, was not making sure I had B12 in their water. And, you know, a good quality multivitamin will get that done, or just go and get some Troy Horse B12 from your local produce store. Pardon me, it should cost you about between 16 and 20 bucks for a 100 ml bottle, and just drop a half a ml to the litre into your drinking water, and away you go.
It's a great product.
Yeah. It's cheap as chips, and yeah, it's the best thing to overcome a lot of that dead in shell stuff. It's not gonna overcome if you've got bacterial issues and those sort of things. It's not going to overcome that, but it'll certainly give the chicks the energy to get out of the shell if they're healthy. The second error, and this was probably pointed out to me, you know, I didn't realise I was making this mistake until I had a conversation with Gary Gazzard. So Gary got a bird off me, a grey green cockbird, a number of years ago, and he was a good, decent bird, big budgie, which is what he wanted. And he took him home, and he's pairing the damn thing up to his best hens. And I've rolled up to Gary's place and gone, mate, what are you doing pairing that thing up to them? And he said, there is no point getting an outcross unless you're going to give it a chance. And I'd probably been doing that, you know, by going and sourcing a bird, not necessarily, you know, putting it right out there and giving it the absolute best hen I could. You know, I'd give it a middle of the rung hen or something like that. And if you do that, you're less likely to keep the chicks because they're not going to be as good, and therefore the benefit of the outcross doesn't get realised. So if you're going to go and spend the money on buying, and I mean, you know, there's birds you buy to fill up your breeding cages, and there's birds you buy to take you ahead. And if you're going to buy a bird that you think is going to, you know, a sort of bird, an investment that's going to take your stud forward, you've got to make sure that you give it every opportunity. Otherwise, it's just a waste of money. And you'll never get the benefit of doing what you're doing. So the third one, I've probably got about 7 of the damn things written down here, but the third one is a reasonably simple one. It's not keeping enough hens. And I reckon this is a mistake we all make. And it's not necessarily just about keeping enough hens. It's about pairing all your good hens up first and not keeping enough good hens in reserve. So if you pair, you know, your top 5 hens up, let's say, to your top 5 cocks or whatever it is, and then you find out that three of those pairs don't click. When you've got, you know, your 3 of your top 5 cocks, and you've got to pair them up for the next time round, the quality of hens you got to work with is right down the list because you've started with your best hens. So make sure that when you're pairing up that you always keep a bank of really good hens aside, so that if your best cocks don't fire, you haven't spent all your petrol tickets early in your pairing up, and you're only left with moderate quality hens to work with for your best cocks. Because I've done that, and I don't do it anymore because there's some really good young hens flying around out there at the moment, probably waiting to get a run. But I used to pair all the good ones up early, and then when the good cocks didn't fire, you got nothing to put them to. And then you got to go and buy them or do something silly like that, and you never buy as well as you breed, I don't find anyway. So always keep a nice little battery of good quality hens aside for your best cocks when they don't fire in the first round. Ray's not here, so after we can talk about this. This is a bit of auction advice. Buy the bird, not the name. Some of the best outcrosses I've bought have been birds that have had a feature I've wanted, but haven't been from well-known breeders. But they're birds that had something that I felt could benefit me. When I have bought the name in the past, it often hasn't really worked for me. And you pay through the nose as well. So identify the bird, you know, forget about who bred it, identify the bird. If it's got the feature, then that's what you want. If it comes from an intermediate breeder, and I'll buy birds from intermediate breeders if they have what I think I need, go for it. But don't get sucked in, don't get caught up in buying the name, because it's, you know, and I get, don't get me wrong, I get that, you know, the top breeders have depth in their stud and that sort of thing, and there's you know, an aspect of that carries you know, that carries some value, right? I get that, and that the lesser breeder, it might just be a one-off thing, but you know, it's up to you as a breeder to capture that trait in that bird. The bird's got it somehow. You know, it's showing that it's got the particular feature. It's got to have some genes that are contributing to that. So, you know, all I'm saying is, I suppose, don't get caught up with the big names. Buy the budgie, not the name. Yeah, I've got a couple left here, and I just want to work out which one I'm going to pick.
You'll have time to do them all. Keep going. Ray's
Yeah,
not there still.
What have you done with Slady?
His internet's gone down. He's completely lost internet coverage with the Optus, so he's out by the sound of it.
Okay, it's you and me.
Yeah, well, I'll ask a lot of questions later, so you'll be right.
Yeah, okay. Hey, did you, while he's not here, did you get your check from Slady for Victor Harbour?
No.
No, neither did I. Okay, so
It's in the post.
It's in the post, yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah. All right. I have done this, and I don't do it anymore, and I should have known better given the work that I do. But too much inbreeding. Too much inbreeding is a recipe for disaster. And you can just basically reduce good lines of Budgerigars down to rubbish if you overly inbreed. And so, and I've done that. You know, I've done the father-daughter stuff and mother-son and all that sort of stuff. And I should have known better, but I still did it. And it doesn't, I don't find any great benefit in it. And if you do it for multiple generations, you know, good luck. You know, and I've heard people try and tell me that, you know, oh, you're fixing all the good traits and you just cull out the bad ones. But, you know, there's not a genetic book in the world that'll tell you that inbreeding is necessarily a great thing. Yes, it's got some advantages, but at the end of the day, inbreeding depression is the enemy of progress, and you just we need to be breeding healthy Budgerigars, and inbred Budgerigars are not healthy Budgerigars. So, you know, sure, do some, you know, keep your lines of Budgerigars together, but avoid the really close inbreeding. You know, do cousins and that sort of thing, no problem, uncle, niece, but don't get it too close. I mean, it'll work occasionally and you'll think, wow, this is really great. But for all the times that it does work, there's going to be many more where it doesn't. And I think also we need to be conscious of the health of the birds we're breeding. And inbred birds are not as healthy, full stop. So be judicious with your inbreeding. Don't go berserk with it. And if you do decide you want to inbreed some birds, that's fine. Make sure the next generation you find something different. You know, you've got to balance it. So, but if you keep breeding the same family together over and over, it will end in disaster.
Okay, thanks for that, Pete. Anyone, any questions?
I was going to ask how close, he did say couples would be okay. Is there any benefit in, say you've got two brothers and you put their progeny together so they're cousins? What would you do after that?
Did you hear that, Pete?
Yep. So if you've got the cousins together, right, you can probably afford to go, you can probably go with, you know, another cousin. It's probably not too bad. But then once you've done that, you probably want to look for something different. You know, I think you just got to, you know, just keep dipping into, you know, I haven't done it this year because I haven't found, well, I bought one bird this year, but I normally try and buy 2 or 3 birds a year, 2 or 3 cock birds. And that's what keeps my stud open, so to speak, from a bloodline perspective. You know, so I think you've got to always bring in something new. And again, if you go back to the where we started, if you're going to bring in an outcross, you're going to make sure you pair it to something good. So if you're bringing in 2 or 3 cock birds each year into your stud, that's going to keep your family and your bloodlines open enough, while still preserving the family structures within those bloodlines for you to be able to then, you know, once you've gone a couple of generations of cousins, then try something new.
If I can just butt in my breeding program, I work in and out. So the families go in, the next year, the offspring from that go out, then they come back in. And I find that keeps it vigorous and healthy. And provided you've made into the right outcross or the non-connected gene pool, nothing deteriorates from it. If you keep going in and in and in and then go out, I have problems. So I've worked over the years just in and out.
Yep.
No mistakes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, that's.
Well, we can't go that. We can't be that quick. Can I go back to the dead in the shell issue?
Sure.
About 12 years ago, I had to build out of that paneling, that aluminium paneling with a new bird room. And I did that, and I put all the birds up, and things were going fantastic. First round, I had fertility everywhere. I had 24 cabinets, probably each. I think I only had 2 that didn't fill eggs. I got 2 chicks, and they were dying at day 16 and day 17. So I ended up sending the some of the dead eggs and some eggs that hadn't hatched, and had them tested, and they came back, but the birds drowned. So the babies drowned in the egg. So what was happening is the moisture level wasn't coming out of the egg sufficient enough to allow enough room for the bird to turn around and crack open. What had happened is that because I had this paneling, I thought, oh, great, I can breed, you know, in the colder months. And when it got cold, I'd lock the bird room up. So what happened was you didn't have the airflow and the transfer of air to allow the humidity and moisture levels in the bird room to change. So by retaining that moisture in the bird room, because I'd had it locked up, we had a problem. Now, I had a friend this year up in Tamworth had the exact same problem. And when he told me, I said, have you thought of this? And I told him what happened. I said, open your windows. He goes, oh, no, it's -2 or 3 degrees. I said, they'll be fine. In fact, I'd even go out and get a fan, an extractor fan, and put that in. And in my bird room, I have one that comes on every 2 hours for half an hour. And he's done that, and it's turned around almost like the next clutch of eggs. Everything's hatching. So that's another one, as well as the B12, which, like Peter, I use all the time. So just remember, even though it's cold, airflow and transfer of air is very important.
And I also have an extraction fan that comes on for half an hour every 2 hours. And you sort of, you know, you've got this nice sort of insulated bird room, and but you know, you're by having the extraction fan going, as long as you haven't got the door wide open, you'll drop the temperature by a couple of degrees max. But you'll still get enough airflow through your bird room. And then, you know, before you know it, if you've got enough sort of sun facing glass, the bird room will warm back up before you know it. And I think that's always important, as the aspect of your bird room when you're planning it. Try and have lots. If you're going to have windows, if you've got windows, try and have them facing east, basically. You know, that's the best aspect for get that morning sun, you know, get enough light in there through the day, avoid the real direct sunlight. That's probably the best thing you can do, I think.
Great, thank you. Would you mind if I asked you about a topic that no one seems to want to discuss, and that's French moult? you ask any breeder, oh, have you had any French moult this year? Oh no, not me. No, I haven't had none in my bird room. Now we know that isn't true. People get it all the time. How would you deal with it if you came across it?
You go first, Peter.
Thanks, Stephen.
You won't like my answer at all.
Yeah, no, look. Okay, so here's the story. Touch wood. For probably about 3 years, 4 years in the not too distant past, I was getting French moult from the first round. And it wouldn't be full-blown French moult, okay? So it was one bird, you'd have one chick in a nest of 4 would be a moulter, you know, and it'd just do your head in, because you'd go, how come I'm just getting one? And so probably, you know, 5 to 10% of the chicks bred, you know, all through the year were birds that would lose their feathers just before they come out of the nest. And you go, what the hell? And you pop them in the baby cage, they grow back. World's a wonderful place, you know. And so what I did, I eventually, you know, I thought it might just go away because it wasn't really severe. The way I got rid of it was by treating my entire flock with doxycycline for 45 days. So what that was telling me was that that the French moult was a symptom of something else. Because let's face it, French moult is latent. It's a virus. It's latent in all, but in most of your birds, right? So it's just sitting there waiting for the right set of conditions to come out. So I've treated my birds with doxycycline for 45 days, which is the treatment for psittacosis. So basically what I had going on was subclinical psittacosis in my flock, and it was manifesting itself as this French moult that was coming out in the odd bird here and there. Once I gave them that 45 days of doxy, I didn't have a problem because I got on top of the psittacosis, and the French moult went away.
Did you notice a difference in the general health of the birds after the 45 days?
Yep.
They're normally loud as, aren't they?
Oh, the noise. Yeah. So they will probably, they didn't get 45 days last year. They got 12 days. They will probably get 45 days this year.
Well, they probably won't, because you won't have the underlying problem.
Well, probably not. It mightn't get past the 10 or 12 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mine only had 7 days this year. And you can tell because their diarrhea turns watery.
Yeah.
When that happens, you've got to take them off. Otherwise, they start looking sick.
Yeah.
It's a great product, and you're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that we should all consider, I think, is trying to keep that level of subclinical psittacosis down. It's good for the birds. It's good for you.
Oh, that's right, for your own general health.
Yeah, you don't need it.
Everything we do, we should be doing for our own general health, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
The bird room should be clean, so when we're in there, we feel comfortable.
Mm. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you can't eat in your own bird room, well, then it's too damn dirty.
Okay, I'll hold you to that one day. That'll get him.
You can come down. We'll get a cheese platter and a couple of glasses of red. Oh no, well that's wasted on you. But red for me and soda water for you.
Yeah.
And we can have a nice afternoon in the bird room.
Wouldn't that be lovely? Thanks for the invite. I'll be there.
Is that a treatment you can do whilst they're breeding?
No.
So they all that has to be done in the aviary, in the flight.
Yep.
Okay.
The reality is, if you get an outbreak of French molt, you got to pull them up anyway, because it just perpetuates itself. Instead of just having one, you'll end up with, you know, most of the nest.
And that was what was unusual about what I was getting, because it wasn't turning into a full-blown outbreak, which was, you know, which is why I tended to persevere. I mean, if it did turn into full-blown French molt, we haven't got any option. You just got to bail. You know, you got to pull everything up and walk away and start again. So, oh, he's back.
I'm back.
So that was the thing that was confounding for me, was the fact that I wasn't getting, it didn't have the full-blown French molt, and I just had to, and I had this other thing going on, and it took a little while to nut it out, but we got it sorted in the end.
Okay, we've got a question from Sue.
So does that mean possibly that a bird you bring in is carrying psittacosis? Because, you know, you can go for years like I did and not get it, and then you bring in bird and all of a sudden you get it, and then it goes again.
I think if you, and again, I don't want to verbal Rob Marshall, but I think he'd probably tell you that it's sitting there in most flocks.
Just takes the right conditions for it to take off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When he first wrote that book, he wrote a letter out to me and go home and do this, such and such. So he said, before you put his pairs down to breed, give them 5 days of doxycycline, 5 days of Carlox, you know, treatment for mites. And this was always prior to your breeding season. Prior to actually, you know, obviously before you put nest boxes on, do anything like that. That was his advice.
Yep.
And see, I don't necessarily give mine doxycycline there. I might give the whole flock some twice a year. And I usually only give it for about 5 days.
I think Peter was talking about when he had a problem that needed to be cured, and that was the recommendation, 45 days. And he mentioned that this time round it only took 12 days. So that tells you that the problem is getting way, way smaller. So, I mean, 5 days is better than no days, isn't it? End of story, really.
And we're very pleased to have Ray back.
I've got the problem. Well, I haven't got the problem sorted. I'm on hotspot from my work phone to try and get some internet.
Excellent. Good to have you back.
No worries.
All right. Well, lucky last. Away you go, Ray.
The things that I look at with the breeding is I've just come in on what the other guys have been saying, and it sounds like medication and isolation and all that sort of stuff.
It was a question particularly about how to get rid of French molt should you get it, because it's a bit of a taboo subject.
Yeah, pulling up breeding is probably the best way to stop it. But the things that I have is with breeding is culling too early with your birds, and another one is not establishing a breeding line, using a mishmash of birds, pairing up when not ready. You've got to always make sure your birds are ready to pair up, and not using buying an outcross and not using it correctly, and buying an outcross with a feature, not trying to buy a whole bird, I think is the important stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Peter did touch on that. He said that he spoke to Gary Gazzard about giving your outcross every chance and by putting it into some of your best birds.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's pretty important. And if you buy an outcross cock bird, use it over a few different hens. It may not click with one, but it may click with one or two others, and not getting rid of the young too early. At least the best of them breed with them back into your own birds. Because you've obviously bought it in for something. So I've seen where people buy an outcross and they think they've bred nothing from it or nothing of quality and get rid of them all. And they've obviously bought the outcross for a reason. So you've got to use it.
So just on that, as an example, I bought a Barry Wise opaline at Melton last year, actually. And I bred him to an opaline hen of mine. And the reason I bought him was because he was clean-headed, but he had no windows in the wing. And he had enough modern feature about him, but it was really, I was really trying to capture the variety features of the bird because he had plenty of melanin in the wing, because a lot of my opalines have got big windows. But this bird had well-marked wing and a clean head. And oftentimes you'll get the well-marked wing and a dirty head. And this bird had the combination of those two things I wanted. I bred him to a decent hen of mine, and I got an okay son, but he's just okay. But I've paired him up to another good opaline hen from my opaline line. And even though I don't think the bird that I bred is as good as his father, he's still carrying half of my opaline family. So I've used him and bred him back to my opaline family so that even though he's a lesser bird, and I've been, I look at him and sometimes scratch my head, you're not gonna, you're gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater if you cut and run too quick in doing that. You just wasted that time and investment. So you've got to give it, like you say, you've got to probably use the best of what you buy from the outcross, even if it doesn't necessarily measure up to what you want, because it's going to have half of your birds in it, half of your birds' bloodlines. So use it back into that family.
That just brings the hybrid vigor anyway, doesn't it?
Mm.
I did something with a Ray Brothers cockbird in 2019. I brought him solely on spot because I wanted to improve the spot in my birds. So the first year or two he didn't click, but last year he just clicked with the hen I put him with, and I've bred birds with huge spots. So that's where I'm going back into now, into my birds with those ones to try and get that spot established in the birds. And it takes time. You've got to look at a 2 or 3 year period and not rush it.
Yeah, there's no instant success, is there?
No. It's patience and perseverance are the two main features in breeding budgerigars.
Any other questions for Ray?
What do they mean by fixing a feature?
Fixing a feature, it's a feature like spot or directional feather or cap release or things like that, length of mask, to fix that into your line of birds so that 90% of the birds that you breed will have that feature. So no matter what you breed them to.
The little blue one down the bottom.
Oh, thank you.
No worries.
Ian, how do you fix it?
By
Spreading it.
Yeah,
It's essentially what Troy does, the pre-pone. You keep breeding two birds with that feature you want back together, and eventually that feature will stick. So then, as Ray said, you then be producing 90% of your chicks will have that feature. So it's using that common feature constantly together.
Once you get one thing established into your flock, you can then move on to the next phase of it, and it's just like building a house. You've got to start from the ground and work up. So you just keep adding a feature each year or two to keep building the bird. It's taken me about 17 years to get to where I am.
It seems to be paying off right now, though, doesn't it?
Oh, it is a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's probably doing it quickly, I'd say.
But it started back in South Australia in, I think, about 2008 or 2009, when I bred a really good grey bird, and he was one of the best birds I ever bred, and I put him over 9 hens in 1 year and established a line of birds that I can trace all my birds back to. And in saying that, you don't need to go out and spend big money to do it. The father of that bird was a $10 John Mully bird and a $20 Jeff Edwards hen. And I can trace most of my birds back to that pair. So it's just about looking at the features and trying to establish, especially a hens line. Hens line is very critical to your breeding.
Can I ask a question?
Far away.
How do you guys deal with tailless wonders?
Give them away for free.
Oh, really? Come on, someone.
If it's in the line of birds, the line of birds is gone for me. If it's a one-off, and there's all the siblings and stuff like that have got tails and wings, there's no problem with them, then I use them. I bred my first national winner. The grandfather of it had no flights. He didn't grow his flights back after his first molt, and I've not had any problems since in the birds.
I would do the same. If I was given something that looked particularly useful, but it didn't have a tail, I would give it a try. And if it could then produce half the chicks coming out with no tails, I would then get rid of that line. I wouldn't want anything to, even the ones with tails would then possibly have the potential to breed more tailless wonders. So I would cull them. But if they all came out normal, as Ray said, then what's the harm in keeping it? It may just be a one-off.
I reckon there's a balancing act here, with birds that don't grow tails and those that do. I mean, it's very much related to feather. And birds with better feather tend to be the ones that struggle to grow tails at times. But I think it's like, I think you've just got to be judicious with your pairing. So firstly, only use the very best of them, okay? Secondly, be judicious with how you use them. And that's probably where, if you're going to breed a bird without a tail back into the family of birds that don't have tails, well, guess what you're going to get? So, you need to be just a bit smarter about how you use that bird. But I certainly wouldn't, I wouldn't just write them off, on face value. If they've got features, give them a crack. I mean, I've got a bird at the moment that's got a real feather feature that I want to harness. He's got extremely dense feather and wide feather for a cinnamon. He grows a tail, but he doesn't grow any flights. which is really quite weird. I haven't used him yet, but I haven't culled him yet either. And you know, I think he's potentially a bird that I'll probably give a round to towards the end of the season, and just see what I might get out of him. But he's quite a different sort of a bird, and you really, sometimes those birds you got to take a risk on. You got to take a chance on them. You know, if I haven't got another bird with that feather feature in my stud, so I either do something and try and capture it, or I just forget I ever have it. You know. And I'm not at the stage where I'm going to walk away from it yet, even though he's got no flights.
Okay, well, I mentioned tailless wonders, so I'm talking about the really good budgies that you breed, and I'm talking really good ones that don't have a tail. My attitude towards them is, if they come out of the nest box without a tail, I won't use them no matter how good they are. Mm. If they lose them when they go through their molt, different story altogether. And as Peter just mentioned, the key is pair them correctly. So don't put them back into the family. They're the ones that I nearly always use to an outcross. And obviously pair it to a bird that's got a good strong tail. But certainly you can't afford to discard the really good ones, because they're the ultimate birds that'll breed and push you forward, I'm sure. In every case, the really good ones, they don't have a tail, you pair them to an outcross with a tail, all the babies have tails.
I think if they carry a lot of cysts and stuff like that, they're obviously the birds that you don't want.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't referring to birds that have cyst problems. I'm just literally, so many birds, some come out of the nest box without a tail right from day one, and you get others that they go through their first molt or their second molt and they just won't grow their tail back. They're the birds I'm talking about, not those that have cyst problems, because we all know where that'll lead us.
Mm.
So yeah,
I had another question. Seems to be mainly cockbirds that lose their tails in my establishment, anyway.
have you noticed that, guys? Is it mostly
Mainly
cockbirds?
cockbirds.
I'm just thinking about what I've got. I would say I'm about, yeah, probably right. Probably the majority of the big cockbirds, but I also have a few hens that have dropped their tails when they've gone through the molt. But yeah, I would say you're probably right. The majority of the birds that I'm using that have not got tails are cockbirds.
I would agree with that. I mean, I've got one super opaline cinnamon hen, who's just an amazing looking budgie that doesn't have a tail. But most of the problem birds for me have been cockbirds.
Yeah, I've got a couple of cockbirds, but I have a hen that didn't grow a tail back the second year, but she breeds me all my best budgies. She's getting quite long in the tooth now, but she, for 3 years in a row, she bred me my best budgies. So I certainly wouldn't discard her.
Do you think it could be a
You could discard it at my place.
Yeah, all mine.
Could it be a protein thing? They're not just got quite enough protein at the end of their body, so it's their tail, like down the spine.
I wish it was as easy as that. We could fix it overnight, couldn't we?
Yeah, you'd never have another one if it was just simply protein.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's got a little bit to do with it, but it's not the total thing. One of the things that I look at, you see babies that come out of the nest and they might drop their the tail or some flights. The one thing that I do now is put them on heat when they come out, so that they're not, especially where I live here, it gets quite cold. So they're not struggling trying to keep warm when they're feeding. They're already warm and they're feeding to grow rather than feeding to stay warm. I think is pretty important if you're in an area where it's quite cool.
That's everywhere, isn't it?
especially where you are.
You don't know what cold is when you try and keep the ice off the blooming drinkers is when you got cold.
Oh, yeah.
From breeding
That's
in
why we
England.
choose not to live in England.
Yeah. Any final questions? No, that's it from the floor, guys. Well, thank you ever so much, you three. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you all and listen to the pitfalls that we have to try and avoid. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No probs. Thanks, guys.
It's been a pleasure. Have a good breeding season, everyone.
Yeah.
And you, Stephen.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.